How are you? Thank you very much. Please. Thank you very much. I'm the late Joe Biden. We did not cancel the first flight. I apologize. We just came straight from the airport, but I'm delighted to be here. And I'm here because of the incredible work all of you do, and my family and I have been an incredible beneficiary of hospice, more than I'd like to acknowledge. But I also am here because of my friend Johnny Isaacson. Johnny's a close personal friend. You know, Johnny and I come from the school that you can disagree like the devil with someone on issues and still be friends. They're not their enemies. I'd do anything for Johnny, and my guess is he'd do it for me too, even though we don't vote the same way. You're lucky to have him. He's a fine, fine guy. And I also want to thank you. Would all the nurses in here please stand up? Seriously, stay standing. I say this from the bottom of my heart. If there are any angels in heaven, they're all nurses. Not a joke. I spent 7 months in the hospital myself with 2 cranial aneurysms, a major embolism. I spent almost 2 months in ICU. I know, like the nurses you are, I know what those machines mean when the line starts to go flat. And I know that you just want to just give up. You just want to, you're not in pain, you just want to stop. But the nurses come along and stroke you, or change your pillow, or whisper in your ear. Doctors allow you to live. Nurses, male and female, you make us want to live. And I just want to personally thank you. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. You're the most underrated profession in all the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have a relatively short speech prepared by a really first-rate staff that I've gone over. And I'm going to speak to some of it, but it's an honor to be here addressing the 70th anniversary of such an impactful organization, 70 years. And, you know, you not only make the final minutes, hours, days, weeks, months of someone's life bearable. But I don't know whether, unless you've been the recipient of hospice, I don't know whether you understand how many people's lives you save, meaning the family members. I don't know whether you, unless you've been through it, understand how profoundly you can affect the mental health of the families who are the caregivers, who are losing someone who's their soul or their heart. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me what you do and what the doctors at hospice do. It's amazing how much difference it makes, in my experience, knowing exactly what to expect. It's frightening, but it allows you to stand there and hold the hand of, sit next to the bed and put your hand on the leg of your mom and know that you have an opportunity to tell her everything you wanted her to know. And know that, that you have time. Simply put, and I mean this sincerely using an expression of my mom's, you all do God's work. It's really incredible what you do. When my mom and dad got sick at separate times, I had the great privilege of being able to, along with my 3 siblings, agree to take them home to my house. My dad spent the last 7 months in my home, the last 3 of those in a hospital bed with hospice coming every day. It allowed me to go down. I was vice president, but it was just before I was vice president. I came home every day from Delaware. It allowed me to kiss him goodnight and kiss him good morning. And it allowed him to preserve his dignity. You know what, those of you who have not been told you're likely to die, as some of us have, for real, it's a sobering message to come from a doctor. But you'd think that the last thing we'd be concerned about is our dignity. But it's the most important thing to us. Just being able to be washed and cleaned so your son or your daughter can watch and not have to watch you go through it. Just being able to preserve as much of the memory as you want your children to remember you by. You're incredible. You're absolutely incredible. I remember with the aneurysms I had, cranialisms I had, they told me, I remember them wheeling me down, telling me you got a really good chance. I said, what is? You got about a 30% chance. And I thought, what the hell, 3 in 10? I might not be one of the 3. But it got my attention when they said you should say goodbye to your sons in the ICU. But the way in which the nurses prepared me to see my sons really mattered. Really mattered. I wanted my boys and my daughter to have an image of me that was consistent with what I wanted to be as their father. And my dad was the same way. And I remember the hospice nurse coming to me and saying, excuse me for being so personal, but it is just personal, what you do. Coming to me and saying, your dad wants to talk to you. I went down and he said, can you get your mom, Joey? And I never, ever, ever eavesdropped on my father and mother, ever. Just like gentlemen don't read gentleman's mail, children don't eavesdrop. But because he asked for my mom, I stood on the other side of a partition because I was worried. And I remember exactly what he said. He said, and the nurse had prepared us for it, he said, he called my mother Puddin'. He said, Pud, is it okay if I go? Now look, guys, you've seen it all. But the fact that we knew what was about to happen, it mattered so much. And then, that was in 2002. My wife's, both her parents died of cancer and had hospice 5 years apart for up to 6 weeks, 4 and 6. And it just changes the dynamic of how families can deal with the pain. Like I said, you all focus on the last hours and minutes of someone's life. But what you do for the families is astounding. My mom was, I was lucky. I was one of those guys who had a mom who everybody in the neighborhood wished had been their mom. Not a joke. Not a joke. And my mom, after my dad passed away, she didn't want to move in with me. And the reason she didn't want to move in with me, even though I had restored a whole portion of the house, was that we grew up in a 3-bedroom home with 4 kids, and of the 19 years I lived with them, with a relative living permanently with us, all but 4 of those years. And it was great for the kids having Grandpa and others there, but I'm not sure how the hell my mom did it. But we finally talked her into moving in toward the end. and watching her. I'd come down, I was vice president then, I'd come down the driveway, go home every night. I'd come down the driveway and I'd stop. There was a little barn that was there, and she asked me, could I sell her house and build her a cottage there, because she didn't want to move in. But it was right at the end of the driveway. And I'd stop, and the hospice nurse would always be there. And my mother had this armchair with an ottoman and the television and fireplace, but the door you came in was to the left. And every night I'd go in, there would be a nurse sitting on the ottoman at my mother's knees. And as we Roman Catholics say, my mother would be hearing her confession. And I could always tell, not a joke, when my mother was giving solace. She'd go like this when she saw me at the door. Like, not now, not now. It was a great honor. They named the hospice facility in Delaware the hospital after my mom, because the nurses all got together. And look, folks, I've witnessed what you do. My son, Bo, died of glioblastoma, stage 4. And you all know that's a death sentence. You know when it occurs. But I watched him, and I watched the nurses, and I watched the relationship they built. The nurses, both from the hospital and hospice, the nurses, about 9 of them from 3 different facilities, waited in line for 5 hours to come in to pay their respects at his viewing at their own expense. Flew from MD Anderson, from Washington, and from Philadelphia. What I don't understand is how you have so much empathy, so much caring, and how you handle it. How you handle it. You're truly remarkable people. You know, because you understand so well what happens when we leave the world, your presence with the family about how to care for, how to process, how losing a loved one is a blessing. Plain and simple. It's one of the greatest gifts that caregivers can possibly be given, family caregivers, what you give. You know, I want to thank everyone who's contributed to the success of Hospice Atlanta. You've come a long way, from what I understand, the past 70 years, touching countless lives, and in the process, doing remarkable work. I was told by Johnny, when you all opened in 1948 as the Visiting Nurses Association, there were 2 nurses serving Georgia's Fulton County and DeKalb County. 2. 75, the organization, now known as the Visiting Nurses System, became the first provider of hospice services in Georgia under the name Hospice Atlanta. By the mid-90s, you launched something I think is so important, as you can tell what I'm about to say from what I've said so far. You launched Camp Stars, the first bereavement camp in Georgia for children who've lost loved ones. I work with the military. They have a similar provision for all those lost in I'm dating myself, in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq. I've been in and out of over 40 times. It's amazing what you do. Amazing how important it is. How really important it is. Shortly thereafter, I'm told you opened a Hospice Atlanta Center to serve patients whose needs couldn't be met at home. And over the last 2 decades, you haven't stopped innovating, bringing new financial tools to your patients, lessening the burdens of cost, delivering new technologies, allowing better communication, better home and care providers. And today, I'm told you have more than 7,000 patients throughout the Atlanta area serving 26 counties, the largest nonprofit in Georgia, providing person-centered home health care, long-term care at home, as well as hospice services. And I just want you to stop and think, because I think you underestimate yourself, of the enormous impact you have. The enormous impact. People's lives have to go on when part of their soul is dying. You allow them to get up in the morning and put one foot in front of the other. Go out and work because they can't afford not to have that paycheck. You allow them to have time to spend time to counsel the child of the mom or the dad who's dying. Now, I know hospice touches far beyond cancer patients, but I'd like to take just a few minutes to talk about what I witnessed through my experience with my son, Bo, and what we're working on in the Biden Cancer Initiative. We did the moonshot. The president always loved State of the Unions because he got to surprise me. He'd never tell me what the heck he was going to have me do. And he turns and says, now Joe will do mission control for the moonshot. Joe will do a study on jobs of the future. Joe will handle the Recovery Act for $820 billion. I said, oh, he thought it was really funny, and he thought it was really cool. You know? But the good news is when he gave me that assignment, he'd give me presidential authority to hire and fire and do whatever I did because we trusted one another. But I didn't look forward to the State of the Unions like you did. I knew what he was going to say about everything except what he was going to turn to me and say, now Joe will. At any rate, what happened was we did a lot of really good work, breaking down barriers and getting docs to play better together in the sandbox and to share data. We have so much more information now than we ever had, and we're beginning to share it in ways that are different. But when I did my final report, I went to see Mike Pence, who's a good guy, and suggested that he take over this because it needs somebody pushing it, somebody with real authority in the White House pushing the urgency of now. And there's so many other things on this president's plate that decided that they continue to do the programs we had, but not to make it the urgent issue. And so a group of folks, many of you know, Eric Landert up at MIT, 21 heads of the largest cancer hospitals in America, got together, and 4 Nobel laureates, and they, without telling me, they went to McKinsey and Company and put together a program and came to me with a presentation as to why they wanted me to do a Biden Cancer Initiative. And I asked them, why me? I remember looking at Eric Lander and Blackburn, a Nobel laureate, and saying, why me? And they said, well, you can do 2 things better than anybody. You can convene people and you can shame them. I said, oh, that's a hell of a thing to do. You know, it was like, okay, I got that. So we have a first-rate organization now, but the reason I mention it is this. I think it applies much of what we're doing to the work you're doing in hospice, Atlanta, Hospice, Georgia. Nearly a year ago, when Jill and I, my wife Jill, launched the Biden Cancer Initiative, we wanted to bring life to our vision, the day when we can effectively prevent, diagnose, treat, and care for cancer patients, especially those who are terminal. Especially those who are terminal. And the Biden Cancer Initiative is our way of continuing to challenge the system to bring the urgency of now to the fight. Another way of putting what we're trying to do is this. We're trying to create a cancer research enterprise and a healthcare system that people think we already have. They think we already have. I'll bet many of you in this room has experiences of my family and me when we were trying to learn about the system dealing with a terminal diagnosis and dealing with a loved one who had that diagnosis. From what I learned over the past 3 years, there's so much opportunity to make things work better for patients and for their families. And by the way, all the docs are good folks, they're researchers. I've never met more dedicated people in my life, but it's an antiquated system. It's a very antiquated system that's modernizing in a way that, when Nixon declared the war on cancer, everyone thought in 1972 there was one cancer. They identified 204 completely different strains of cancer. They thought the image was Jonas Salk going to the laboratory and coming up with a silver bullet to solve it. Now we know that that's not the root. It takes scores of disciplines. Mechanical engineers are as involved as NASA is. I said, when I did this, they said, why you get NASA involved? NASA's forgotten more about radiation than any medical doctor will ever learn. So we're these combined disciplines. 5 years ago, immunotherapy was considered a voodoo science. Not a joke. Not a joke. 7 years ago, to be precise. So there's all this coming together. We can now do 1,000,000 billion calculations per second to look at patterns that would take Nobel laureates if we had amassed enough data, enough sequencing of cancer genomes. We could find patterns that would take Nobel laureates a decade to figure out. So there's a lot going on, a lot going on. And so when I said we want to create a system that most people who haven't gone through it before think exists. For example, we should be able to say that the affordability of cancer treatment is getting better and not worse. That's not true. We can't say that. Cannot say that. We should be able to say that there's widespread sharing of research data and medical records are easier and cheaper to get in a way that patients can share them with research, but you can't. We should be able to say that your doctor in Hawkinsville, Georgia, has the tools needed to treat whatever cancer that is diagnosed, the same as the doctor in Winship Cancer Institute here in Atlanta is able to do. But we can't. But it's all within our reach. We can. We can get there. We can get there. And we're going to get there soon. We should be able to say that patients are provided nurse navigators who will talk them through with their caregivers, through the treatment options, through financial conversations to help them find their way through the complicated maze of our healthcare system. Not intentionally complicated, it's just complicated. But we know we can. If you notice, whenever I'm talked about on television, if it's positive, it's that Biden is an expert in foreign policy. And, where I come from, an expert's anyone from out of town with a briefcase. I have no briefcase. But I can tell you, we make foreign policy sound so complicated. Healthcare is 5 times as complicated. Not a joke. Not a joke. As foreign policy is. We should be able to say that providers are having conversations early with cancer patients and their families of what their goals are in their treatment, what outcomes are meaningful to them, and how they want to make decisions in their final months if treatment isn't successful. But all too often, those difficult topics aren't talked about until in many cases it's too late. In each of these areas, there's reason grounded in tradition and culture, history, personal advancement that may have been valid 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but certainly aren't valid any longer. But they still strongly resist change because of inertia. But we can change them. We have to change them. So to focus on the last issue, because it's particularly relevant to this organization, these conversations about palliative care and hospice aren't prioritized. And therefore, they're often put off to the last minute, causing, not because of you, in spite of you, causing incredible turmoil, dysfunction, fear, and sometimes near paralysis in families dealing with the loss, the near certain loss of someone they adore. This means you aren't able to provide all the services and support that you're able to provide. I just learned that the results in hospice being brought in for the final days rather than weeks and months, when you can be most effective, is sometimes missing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been told that the goal is that hospice be brought in up to at least 6 months for someone's care. And yet the average amount of time a patient spends in hospice is 5 days. And we're looking into how to force these conversations to happen earlier so that all of the services you offer can be used by more patients and more families and change their lives and the lives of their children and their grandchildren. So part of the Biden Cancer Initiative, Jill and I we're on a listening tour, listening to local voices all over the country and quite frankly around the world. I've got 10 nations to sign on to agreements to share data with the United States. And we're going to base the priorities we're going forward on this important feedback. Because, folks, we'd love for you, as we're doing this, well, I won't get into that. But where we are right now is that you have expanded in ways that are costly, require intensity of focus and work, and you're trying to help in multiple ways that you hadn't been able to do 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think we may be able to work in some partnership with you to accommodate some of the things that are going on. Let me conclude by saying that, close of the story, we, 2 years ago, as the Irish say, I went back home, meaning that the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, for the various ones, for the last 25 years have asked me to, I've been to Ireland many times, but come home, and there's a Gaelic expression saying 100,000 welcomes, and to go find my relatives and go to where my grandparents and great-grandparents came from. And I'd never done it because I thought it would get in the way of my job. And finally, the last year, Taoiseach Edna Kenny, I always have, as vice president, a St. Patrick's Day breakfast for the Taoiseach who comes every year, and then I take him to see the president, and we have a meeting on foreign policy. And in the middle of the meeting, he turned to Barack and said, Mr. President, he said, for God's sake, let Joe go back to Ireland. You only send them to Ukraine and Syria and Afghanistan. And let him come home. Let him come home. And so, so Barack said, you got to go home. Now, no one in my family has been in Ireland since 1849, all right? But I went home, and I went to the birthplace of my relatives and traced them back in the various counties. And the one side of the family, it was Finnegan and Blewett, and the Blewett side is from County Mayo, and from a town called Ballina. And I met my relatives, and I was really pleased to see they all had their teeth. They all had their, they all were, the joke is you go home and go, oh God, but they were lovely people. And I met a cousin who is a blood cousin named Loretta Blewett, and she heads up Hospice Ireland, all of Ireland. I didn't know that. And so they have a major project going on in the Republic of Ireland to build 4 new multi-million-dollar facilities. They're averaging $4 million each for care for people who have no homes to go to and for extended care. And I'm going to be going back very shortly because they're naming one of them the Beau Biden, after my son, hospice. And they're doing what you're expanding and doing. They are vastly expanding their services. And I just want to say that as a recipient of, as an observer of, as someone who spent a lot of time because of my experience, when you all, raise your hand here if anybody has lost someone who's from cancer. Well, you know what happens. Your friend who finds out someone has cancer comes to you and asks for advice and help. Well, I've had, unfortunately, a lot of experience with losing a wife, a daughter, a son, etc. And one of the things that I am confident of, it matters. It matters if you help bring peace and hope. And it's not always hope that the person receiving the palliative care will live. It's hope for the family. It's hope for the family. And I'll end with I'm not sure it's a funny story, but my siblings kid me about it. Toward the very end, the doctor, the medical doctor, head of hospice in Wilmington, Delaware, wanted to come out and see me and my family to tell us what to expect in the last minutes, the breathing patterns and why it was getting very close, etc., and why I should not keep the trip I had lined up to go to Ukraine and so on. And he was very, very helpful. And we all were adjusted. We all knew, having gone through it before, generically what was going to happen. And he looked at me and he said, but Mr. Vice President, you cannot be in the room. I've never shared this story publicly. You cannot be in the room when your mother dies. And I thought, wait a minute, whoa. Hey, I'm the oldest man. You know. I said, what do you mean I can't be in the room? He said, because I used to stutter very badly as a kid, and my mother just pounded in my head that never quit, never get up. Her expression was, as long as you're alive, you have an obligation to strive, and you're not dead to seeing the face of God. You've got to get up, just get up, and constantly. He said, she won't die in front of you. And I said, that's bizarre. Well, you pros know. So we're all four of the siblings, two at the head of the bed and the big bed, and two at the foot on the bed. I'm holding my mom's left foot and rubbing it, and my sister's across from me, and the breathing became, as you know, how it goes. And my sister looks at me and says, Joey, leave. I said, no. She said, Joey, just go in the bathroom and count to 100. I walked in the bathroom. I counted to 60. I came out and she had passed. The point is, you know so much. You help so much. And those of us who've been the beneficiary of your love, your expertise, your professionalism, we owe you so much. God bless you all. Thank you.